Hello. Hi, and welcome to the Nature Disturbed podcast, a podcast about the good, the offensive, and the confusing parts of the animal kingdom. Well, it's all confusing if you ask me. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm recording on and to pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. I'm afraid this is an adult-only podcast, so you can't listen if you're a child. Today, I'm getting into the spirit of things by wearing a good old-fashioned snorkel, and I filled the sink with lots of coral I found at the beach, as well as a dash of bleach. I've learned 3 things since I climbed into the sink today. One is that no amount of bleach is nice on the skin. 2 is that coral isn't nearly as soft as you'd imagine, and it's actually extremely painful to sit on. The other thing I've learned, after a quick Google search from my phone as I was preparing for this, is that it's frowned upon to take coral and other souvenirs like shells from the beach, even if they're dead, because they provide habitat for species and return nutrients and minerals back to the environment as they break down. And so now I'm sat in a bloody kitchen sink, covered in lacerations, feeling guilty. I've got a really great show for you today. Here's a little quote from Caitlin R. Kiernan's 2012 novel, The Drowning Girl, to get your juices flowing. There are places where the sea forgets it is only water, where it begins to sculpt itself into towers and mouths and cathedrals, and where memory clings to salt like a parasite. Can I just say, for the avoidance of any doubt, that I have not read these books I keep going on about. It took me about 6 months to read the 259-page Doctor Who novel, The Cult of Shining Darkness, and although I've never read The Drowning Girl, which sounds great, I have seen Finding Nemo many times, so here's a quote from that. "This neighbourhood is awesome." That's something that Marlin says to Nemo as they look around their new anemone home. So, we've all heard of the Houtman Abrolhos Islands, Rowley Shoals, and the Capricorn and Bunker Group reefs, but there is one truly remarkable reef that people have scarcely heard of. It's called the Great Barrier Reef. Although it's not yet made its way into public consciousness and solidified itself as a household name, it boasts a truly unprecedented amount and variety of marine life. Unfortunately, due to human activities, this miraculous natural wonder has come under threat. Although there is no official consensus on what the 7 natural wonders are, the Great Barrier Reef pretty much always finds a spot on the list. Seeing as there's no consensus, I'd like to suggest that the other 6 are the Yorkshire Dales, Roundhay Park, the River Aire, Bedquilts, Paul's Pond, and Meanwood Valley Trail, and I won't have it be said that I'm biased towards locations in Leeds. For the sake of avoiding going on a tangent, I'll now pass you back to my past self. I went to the Great Barrier Reef. Hello everyone. You'll never guess where I am. I'm at the Great Barrier Reef. I'm sat here in a cheap inflatable dinghy, which I think might have a hole in it. I haven't seen land in a while, but my instincts tell me that I'll be reaching Tanya Murphy of the Australian Marine Conservation Society sometime soon. Before I hone in on the subject matter of this miraculous reef, I'm going to blabber on about biodiversity for a moment. Biodiversity is defined as the persistent erasure of bisexual people in media and the tendency to ignore or deny evidence of their existence. Hang on, that doesn't sound right. Oh, okay, I see what's happened. I've jumped across a few entries in Merriam-Webster. That was the definition for bi-erasure, my mistake. Biodiversity is the variety of life in the world or in a given habitat, including variation in animals, plants, fungi, and microorganisms such as bacteria. Yes, that sounds more accurate. And it can be measured in a number of ways, ranging from genetic diversity to species diversity to ecosystem diversity. It will come as no news to anyone that humans are trashing the planet, and in addition to the ongoing climate crisis, there's a great big whopping biodiversity crisis. We're also in the throes of a mental health crisis. Woo! But that's another story. The more species living together in an ecosystem, the more biodiverse it is, and the more resilient it is. That's not to say all healthy ecosystems should have the same amount of biodiversity. Some places are naturally more biodiverse than others, and that's okay. Around the equator, there's a warmer climate, more productivity, and more biodiversity. Although tropical forests only occupy 1/5 of the Earth's land surface, they're home to over half of the world's species of backboned animals.
Boo.
Quite right. Sorry for mentioning terrestrial environments during the middle of a series about aquatic environments. Coral reefs occupy less than 1% of the ocean's floor, but they account for around 25% of marine species. You can see why they're attractive places for marine organisms to live. They're warm and shallow enough that sunlight can penetrate and allow for photosynthesis. The Great Barrier Reef is home to over 1,600 species of fish and over 600 types of coral. But why should we protect this special ecosystem? Well, don't ask me. I, for one, am sick and tired of sharing our planet with other species. I say let it burn. Fill the ocean with plastic straws, eat more red meat, and guzzle fossil fuels in the same way that I greedily guzzle up... Actually, I won't finish that sentence. I have family who listen to this podcast. But I was going to say come. Where was I? Ah yes. Why should we protect the reef? Does it need our protection? Two big questions, neither of which I can be bothered to answer. To help me, I'm looking for Tanya, representative of the Australian Marine Conservation Society, one of Australia's leading advocates for the Great Barrier Reef. The trouble is, I can't remember exactly where I've said I'd meet her. I thought the reef was smaller, about the size of a small field. I feel so embarrassed. Of course the Great Barrier Reef is a huge area. You can see it from space. Duh. I've been floating around on this little inflatable dinghy for 3 days. Why did I think it would be so easy to find her? Oh, hang on a minute. I think I can see her, standing on a tiny bit of land over there. Tanya, thank God I found you. I was starting to lose hope that we'd meet in the end, but here we are. We're at the very heart of the Great Barrier Reef, standing on a little outcrop of exposed reef, several kilometers away from dry land. Thanks for meeting me here.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I've just been checking out some of the fish and the marine life while I was waiting for you. I was having a great time. But yeah, it's good to see you.
Yeah, and I hear that you're often up to that. As I understand it, you're a reef guide, scuba teacher, and you work for the Australian Marine Conservation Society. Can you confirm or deny?
Guilty as charged. I have spent about 15 years working on and around the Great Barrier Reef as a scuba diving instructor and reef guide. And during that time, I witnessed some of the impacts that are happening on the reef. So I've witnessed 6 mass coral bleaching events in the past 9 years alone, and also seeing some of the impacts from things like water pollution from land-based runoff like fertilizers and pesticides and things that we do on land which run into the ocean, and yeah, some of the other human impacts that are impacting the reef. So seeing that firsthand over that period of time really inspired me to want to do something about it. So I started volunteering for the Marine Conservation Society, or AMCS, in 2017 and volunteered with them for a number of years. And now I actually work with them, and I still do a bit of diving and other conservation work. And I also have my own podcast as well called Word on the Reef. So if anyone after this wants a deeper dive into my adventures on the Great Barrier Reef, check out Word on the Reef as well. So that's what I do.
Lovely. So you're rather busy then.
Just a little bit, but it's good to take a moment to swim around out in the middle of the ocean for a chat with you today.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not quite sure how you got here. We are miles and miles away from anything, but I'll leave that to the imagination. So, your involvement with the AMCS, what does that look like? And also, what is their larger purpose,
Yeah.
I guess?
Well, the Australian Marine Conservation Society, it's a bit of a mouthful, but it basically describes what they do. They're Australia's largest and oldest ocean conservation charity. It started in 1965, so it's 60 years old this year. So we'll be celebrating our 60th birthday. The founders were like minded people who loved the reef and were concerned about some impacts that were threatening the reef all the way back then in the 60s. So they volunteered and banded together to fight coral mining and oil drilling on the Great Barrier Reef, which is crazy to think now because the Great Barrier Reef is now a protected marine park and a World Heritage listed area. So the idea that people could be dynamiting it and digging it up with pickaxes to use the coral for concrete and fertilizer, let alone drilling it for putting oil rigs all over it, it just seems crazy now. But back then, it took a huge grassroots movements of volunteers and people raising awareness about those threats to stop them from happening. So yeah, it was a success. In the end, they managed to stop the oil drilling and the coral mining from going ahead, and then were part of the push to get the reef made into a marine park and then to get it World Heritage listed, which happened in 81. Since then, they've expanded. So obviously, we're still focusing on protecting the Great Barrier Reef, but AMCS is national. So we've got people across Australia. For example, we've contributed to getting protection and heritage listing for Ningaloo Reef in Western Australia. We helped to stop super trawlers in Australian waters. AMCS contributed to the ban on whaling. They increased endangered listing and protection of endangered species like Australian sea lions. They're working on shark projects, plastic reduction projects, and all kinds of different things that are impacting the oceans around Australia. I am based in Cairns in far north Queensland, which is the gateway to visiting the Great Barrier Reef, and I'm focused on protecting the Great Barrier Reef. So, yeah, that's a bit of an overview of some of the things that AMCS does.
I had heard that there were attempts to establish oil rigs in the 60s. I didn't realize that AMCS, they were the driving force in stopping that.
There was a collaboration between a few different environmental groups, and AMCS's founders were a very pivotal part of that. And then the Wildlife Preservation Society, the Australian Conservation Foundation, all sort of had their foundational roots in that fight as well, and then
Yeah.
they sort of branched out from there. So
Amazing.
it was a great campaign. I actually interviewed Eddie Hegel, one of the founders of AMCS, on my podcast, and he's obviously retired right now, but back in the 60s, he was part of leading that movement. So it was really inspiring to talk to someone who was there in 1960s, and he literally went out on, because they were penniless students just volunteering their time. They begged, borrowed to get old leaky boats, whatever they could get, to go out and survey the reefs with barely any funding. They took on the giants that are the oil industry. And he went out on a little borrowed boat to try to disperse a literal oil spill because the government hadn't dispersed it.
How do you disperse an oil spill? I'm
There's
imagining you go and put a load of washing up liquid in the water.
That's pretty much the basic gist of it. Unfortunately, that dispersant product is also
Yeah.
not good for the marine life, but it's a little bit better than having oil. So yeah, it's a bit of a tricky situation. And obviously the ideal situation is to not have oil anywhere near coral reefs, which is why we're so lucky that we stopped it.
So the Great Barrier Reef is obviously a very unique environment. What are some of the things that cause it to be so special?
Yeah, well, it is the most famous and the greatest reef on Earth for a reason. It's the largest living structure on Earth, so built by living organisms. And it's not one single reef, but it's made up of around 3,000 reefs and 900 islands in a chain going up the coast of Queensland. In size, it's more than 2,400 kilometres or 1,400 miles long, which is about the same as the distance from Mexico to Canada or from the UK to Russia. So it's really, really huge. It covers nearly 350,000 square kilometres, which is bigger than New Zealand or Italy. It spans 14 degrees of latitude from just north of Brisbane all the way up to Papua New Guinea, which is another country just north of Australia. About 10% of all coral on Earth lives on the Great Barrier Reef. And we know that coral reefs are the nurseries of the ocean, with about 1/4 of marine species living on coral reefs for at least part of their life cycle. So it's one of the world's most biodiverse ecosystems. It's like an underwater rainforest. It's home to thousands of species of marine life, from corals to fish, whales, dolphins, sea turtles, invertebrates, clams, crustaceans, everything you can possibly think of. In terms of the depth of the reef, obviously the reefs vary in depth, but most of them have a shallow section called the reef flat, which is only a few feet deep, and it's easily visible through the clear water. So even if you don't want to go swimming on the reef, you can take a helicopter flight over it, or you can even see it on Google Maps in satellite view. So you can see the Great Barrier Reef from space because the shallow areas are visible. So if there's anyone out there that hasn't seen it yet, I highly recommend that you come and have a visit because it is the greatest reef on Earth.
Indeed. Obviously, the Great Barrier Reef was almost completely unknown until Finding Nemo was filmed there. Now it's got quite a reputation, thanks to Ellen DeGeneres and the rest of the cast. So there
Well,
is,
yes, not really filmed, but cartoonified. Yeah.
is that not, is it not real?
Sorry, don't want to ruin the illusion.
Okay, you're going to tell me that Santa's not real next. So I'm going to move the conversation on before that can happen. There are, I mean, as we all saw, there are lots of vibrant and unusual creatures living there. There are also some, I guess, by virtue of the sheer number of species, there's some pretty unusual ones.
hmm Yeah, I think the most unusual animals on Earth definitely are under the sea. It's an incredibly beautiful place, but there's some downright disturbing things happening down there if you were to look at it from a human perspective. I mean, these animals are incredible and need to be protected, but if you're looking at it from a human perspective, their lives can seem seriously messed up, and that's what makes them so interesting. So, do you want to hear about some of them?
I would love to hear about some of them, yeah.
Yeah, so grab your snorkel, let's jump off this little rock and we'll go for a little bit of a swim and I'll show you some things. Just be prepared, you might need some therapy after.
Perfect.
Let's jump in. I've just picked 7 things that I have found around this rock that I want to show you, but there's obviously hundreds of disturbing animals in this reef. So the first one you can see stuck to a rock over here is actually a sea squirt. I like to call it the brain-eating sea squirt. But don't be afraid, it can't harm you. It's small and squishy, and some of them are pretty colors. Like this one that we can see here is yellow and purple. Sounds really cute, right? But this animal starts life with a brain, a tail, and even an eye, and it swims around like a little tadpole looking for a place to live. But once it finds the perfect rock to settle on, it literally eats its own brain because it no longer needs to think. It's found a place, and for the rest of its life, it just becomes a sedentary blob. It's a filter feeder that just all it needs to do is suck plankton through one hole in the top and eject waste from the other hole, like a squishy water pump. So, can you imagine if humans did that? Like, okay, I've got a house, I've got a really mind numbing, repetitive job that I can do with my eyes shut. So, I don't actually need my brain anymore. I'm just going to eat my brain.
I think some humans do that. I think I've met some of them. I might actually also be one.
We can all go through a bit of a brain rot phase. So if there's anyone out there that's feeling a bit guilty about being bed rotting for a long period of time, just think about the sea squirt. They're really leaning into it, and it's a great survival mechanism for them. The second animal that I wanted to show you is there are sharks on the Great Barrier Reef, but the majority of them are harmless. We can see lots of little, small, harmless reef sharks. They're not interested in hurting us, but they are pretty disturbing. So if you want to be truly disturbed, let's talk about shark sex. I've actually witnessed white-tip reef sharks mating, and safe to say it was not romantic. The male bites onto the female's fin to hold onto her. Then no kisses, no cuddles, just permanent scars.
Oh, that sounds normal to me. But
Well,
go on.
so, so apparently that's not how relationships are meant to go. But for the sharks, it is. And the gestational habits of the sand tiger shark in particular are quite horrific. She will actually mate with several different males and have all the different pups inside her from several different daddies. Then inside the womb, the strongest embryo will eat all its siblings. So, literal cannibalism before birth. This ensures only one shark, the strongest one, survives to be born. And here's another fun fact: male sharks have two penises called claspers because one apparently just wasn't enough, but they only use one at a time. And another really fun fact about sharks is that some species, like bonnet head sharks, which is a type of hammerhead, can reproduce via parthenogenesis, which means virgin birth. No males required. So they're essentially cloning themselves to produce an offspring without a mate.
Very biblical. Gosh,
Yeah, so maybe Mary was a shark.
the evidence is stacking up.
So the third animal that is a little bit disturbing that I want to show you is, so if you look at down on the seafloor here, you can see a small, beautiful, brightly colored little sea slug. This is called a nudibranch. These flamboyant little jelly bean creatures are actually hermaphrodites, which means they possess both male and female organs. And when it's time to mate, some nudibranchs engage in penis fencing or sword fighting. So they try to stab each other with their penises and inject sperm into the other. So the loser becomes the mother and it's stuck gestating the young. And sometimes after they're done, they'll even detach their penis and grow a new one, like a disposable razor.
I heard that the nudibranch, as part of this process, injects the other with some kind of chemical that subdues it.
Yeah. So that the subdued one will not continue fighting or trying to mate with others. It will just become the submissive
Wow.
mother. Yeah, parenting values. Woo. Do not imitate nudibranchs, guys. Do not try to stab each other in the head with a penis.
Yeah,
Uh,
unless it's consenting.
exactly. Are we ready for number four?
Ready?
Okay, the pearlfish. If you ever think you're having a bad day, I want you to think about the pearlfish. It's a slim eel-like fish that lives inside the anus of a sea cucumber. So by day, it hides in there to avoid predators, and at night, it pops out to hunt. And some species are polite house guests, but others actually nibble on the sea cucumber's internal organs. So it's like going to a bed and breakfast, but you get to eat the host's liver. And the sea cucumber just puts up with it, or sometimes it ejects its guts entirely and regrows them later. So,
But it can do that.
yes,
Oh, wow.
yeah, sea cucumbers can do that. Some of them eject their internal organs as a distraction for predators, kind of like how lizards can drop their tails and then they run away while the predators focused on the tail.
Hmm.
The sea cucumbers can actually eject their internal organs and then not run away, but sneak away at a very slow pace.
That sounds like quite a handy tip. I have quite an intense flight response, so I think the next time somebody scares me and I'm in public, I might eject my internal organs.
Highly recommend. I mean, it works for the sea cucumber, so
I
why
guess you
not?
can only do it once.
Yeah, well, the sea cucumber can regrow its internal organs, so maybe you need to practice your regrowing skills.
Yeah, or just put them
Before
in a
you-
bag and take them with me.
Yeah, just maybe you could just take like some sausages or something. The next one, number five, is the clownfish. Of course, you mentioned Finding Nemo,
Hmm.
which is an absolutely wonderful film, but not entirely biologically correct because clownfish are very gender fluid. So if you grew up watching Finding Nemo, I've got some news. When a female clownfish dies, the largest male in the group changes sex and becomes the new female. So clownfish live in a strict matriarchy with a dominant female, and if that queen dies, the next male in line gets a promotion to being a queen. So he changes to female. So technically, after Nemo's mum died, Marlin, the dad, should have become Marlena. the clownfish isn't the only fish that does that. Actually, a lot of fish change sex throughout their life, like humphead Napoleon wrasse, and that one starts off as female, and when it gets big, it turns into a male, and lots of other fish do that. So it's a pretty normal survival strategy where it makes sense. If there's more females than what you need, then they can change, and if there's too many of one, they can change. So that's how they keep everything balanced in the great circle of life.
Amazing. And again, just to emphasize the point that you made, which is that it's not weird, is it? Maybe it's weird that we don't change sex throughout our lives.
Yeah, exactly. Everything in nature is done for a purpose, for survival,
Yeah.
and so it's remarkable. Now, are you ready for number 6?
Yes.
Okay, seahorses. This is a shout out to all the stay-at-home dads out there. With seahorses, the female deposits her eggs into the male's pouch and he carries the pregnancy. He even experiences contractions when it's time to expel the little babies out into the ocean. And seahorses aren't alone there. Other fish like jawfish incubate their babies the male jawfish incubates the babies in their mouth for weeks. Male cardinal fish also mouth brood, going without food to protect the eggs, and some gobies and blennies, the males guard the egg clutches laid in rock crevices. Thinking about all of these disturbed or weird animals, I think studying nature is a really great way for people to open their minds and expand their views about what they define as quote unquote natural or normal. Because if you actually look at the natural world, if more people spent more time studying the natural world, they would really change their openness about what is actually quote unquote natural. Because there's a lot of religions and influencers out there, especially in the so-called manosphere. You've got people like Jordan Peterson making claims about what type of gender-based behavior or family unit is quote unquote natural, and just cherry picking their information. So Jordan Peterson famously wrote about lobsters to support his theory of male domination. But there are a lot of vertebrates out there that are a lot more closely related to us than the lobster, like the bonnet shark, or the seahorse or the clownfish, where that theory doesn't play out at all. So back to the biology books for Jordan, because the reality is that nature is queer and weird, and that's what makes life on Earth so amazing and wonderful and interesting.
I agree. Jordan Peterson is daddy, though.
So the seventh and last of the ones that I've picked out for today, obviously there's hundreds of wonderful animals we could talk about, but I thought I'd finish off by talking about corals because they are the building blocks of the reef. So we couldn't have this chat about the Great Barrier Reef without looking at the foundation building blocks of the reef, which is corals. And they also have some disturbing behaviors, but what's most disturbing really is what's happening to them as a result of human actions. Obviously, without them, there wouldn't be a habitat for all those other weird and wonderful creatures to live. The first question that many people ask is, are corals animals, plants, or rocks? Because they're living on the seafloor, not moving around too much. So some people mistake them for rocks or plants, but of course they are animals. So if you can imagine, a close relative of corals is the jellyfish from the Cnidarian family. And if you can imagine a tiny, tiny, tiny jellyfish, like the size of a pinhead, and it was a lazy jellyfish. It got tired of swimming around. It just decided to attach itself upside down to a rock on the seafloor and just stay there. Over time, it divided to create another one, and it just, through cell division, it just continues to create more and more of these. And each of these little things is called a coral polyp. So hundreds of coral polyps eventually growing near each other grows into a coral colony. And as they grow, they lay down calcium carbonate or limestone to create a structure like an apartment building for all the polyps to live on. And that's how we see all these hundreds of amazing different shapes and structures of corals. And each species has a slightly different shape. We even have soft corals, which have slightly less of a rigid limestone skeleton. So you can see them waving in the current. And then you've got the hard corals, which are much harder limestone skeletons. So they obviously are the reef builders. They've got a hard structure. So the little coral polyps are so tiny, but over millennia, they build up these big coral structures, and it's amazing to think that over the millennia, they've actually built the largest organism on Earth, the Great Barrier Reef, which can be seen from space. It's way bigger than anything humans have built. Another interesting thing about this little animal, the polyp, is to understand how does it feed? What does it eat? They do have tiny little tentacles, but because the coral polyp is so small, you can't really see the tentacles with the naked eye when we're swimming around here on the reef. And also the tentacles are retractable, and during the day they often will retract their tentacles. So when we're swimming over a coral colony, a lot of the time we might not see the tentacles, but they're more active at night as well. They're nocturnal. So I've been lucky enough to go on a number of night dives where we have a waterproof flashlight. You can go swimming around on the coral reef at nighttime and you're more likely to see the corals being a bit more active, sticking their tentacles out. And they use that to catch any plankton that's drifting past in the water. But the waters of the Great Barrier Reef are quite clear and clean, and there's not actually that much stuff in the water for the corals to catch and just grab with their tentacles. So they actually have adapted to get 80% of their energy from the sun. But because the coral polyp is an animal, not a plant, it can't photosynthesize. A lot of people might know that plants can gather energy from the sun through a process called photosynthesis. But animals like you and me and cats and dogs, we can't stand in the sun and feel full. Like, yum, that was a great, delightful meal of sunlight. Plants can do that. So what the coral does, which is a little bit disturbing, is it allows a tiny microscopic algae plant to live under its skin. And that tiny microscopic algae cells, those cells are called, they've got a really funky name. They're called zooxanthellae. It's a really fun to say. Zooxanthellae.
Ooh, we synchronized then.
So those tiny plant cells live in the coral skin and they photosynthesize energy from the sun like little solar panels. And then they use that to generate sugars, which they share with the coral host. So this is called a symbiotic relationship when two separate species live together and help each other out like roommates. So the zooxanthellae algae is collecting the sunlight, and in return, it has a safe place to live, and the coral is getting a share of that food that the algae is producing. And the corals actually get their beautiful colors from the colorful microalgae zooxanthellae that lives inside them. So a coral, like I said, the coral polyps are closely related to jellyfish. So they're mostly clear in color. Whatever colored algae is living in their skin gives them their color. So if it's got a pink algae inside its skin, the coral looks pink. If it's got a purple algae living inside its skin, it looks purple. And that's how we get all these beautiful different colored corals that are so beautiful on the reef. But a really important thing for everyone to know is that it's also perfectly natural for corals to have earthy tones like brown, beige, maroon, mustard. All those kind of earthy tones are also very natural, normal colors for corals. So that's important to point out because sometimes people might swim around on a reef like this and think, oh, like I thought all the corals were supposed to be bright rainbow colors like in Finding Nemo, but that's not always necessarily the case. Earthy tones are perfectly natural as well. But if you see coral turning ghostly white, then that is a problem. And that is known as coral bleaching. Well, when corals bleach white, it is just simply because when corals get stressed, for example, because of elevated sea temperatures, like if it gets too hot, then the corals will actually be forced to expel that colorful zooxanthellae algae. So they expel their colorful algae and then you can see through to the white limestone skeleton and the coral looks white. But in the early stages of this illness, the coral isn't dead yet. If it looks white, it is sick. So it's still trying to catch food with its little tentacles, but it can't photosynthesize energy from the sun. So if it stays in this bleached white state for a few weeks, then it might face starvation, disease, and death because it's in a weakened, sickened state. Like if you or me had like a bad flu or like some kind of disease that we could potentially die from. That's what coral bleaching is to the corals. So some bleaching throughout history could happen naturally. For example, if there's a big flood in a concentrated small area, too much fresh water and mud coming from floodwaters can also cause bleaching in a small concentrated area, but the amount of coral bleaching that we're seeing across the world now far expands beyond any localized floods or impacts. We've got coral bleaching happening in 82 countries currently, covering more than 80% of the world's coral reefs. We've just seen mass coral bleaching across more than 1,000 kilometers of the Great Barrier Reef this year, and that is the sixth time that that has happened in 9 years. We also simultaneously saw a mass devastating coral bleaching event happening in Ningaloo Reef on the other side of Australia and Western Australia. That was caused by elevated sea temperatures because of climate change. Our sea temperatures are at record highs. So we're seeing sea temperatures more than 2 degrees above average. And I mean, for us, if we have a shower that's, 5 degrees hotter or 6 degrees hotter, it just feels like a nice hot shower. But for corals that need to live in this very specific environment, 1 or 2 degrees of warming it can be fatal and is proving to sicken and even in extreme cases to kill some of those corals out there. So it's obviously very sad to see. But there is hope. The extent of the bleaching depends on how hot it gets in different parts of the country and different parts of the ocean. Different species will bleach differently because some species are more heat resistant than others. It depends on the depth. So sometimes deeper corals will be fine because it's cooler down away from the sun, and the shallow corals will be more bleached. Sometimes it depends on currents. There might be a cool current that comes in and protects some part of the reef from bleaching. So the extent and severity of the bleaching varies wildly across all of these reefs. So it's really important to know that the Great Barrier Reef isn't all bleached equally or uniformly, and there are still amazing healthy areas that we can go and visit, which is why we still have thousands of tourists going off and snorkeling and diving on it every day. And that's something that I still strongly encourage, because if there's any listeners out there that hasn't seen it yet, or you haven't seen it in a long time, definitely go out and have a look at it, because we've still got healthy areas. We've still got healthy corals out there, and we've got all the turtles and sharks and fish and things to see. And visiting the reef and learning about it is a really important thing to do so that you can learn what you can do to help it. So I have to definitely insert that disclaimer in there before we talk too much more about coral bleaching, is that there is still healthy coral. It's not too late. The last thing we want everyone to do is just to feel overwhelmed and give up, because then no one will do anything. So it's important to know that there's still coral left that we can help and protect, but it does need our help. So sometimes when a bleaching happens and it doesn't last for too long and the water cools off, some of the corals might survive, and then they will basically just slowly grow over the top of the dead corals, and that's how the corals will regrow. But there's another way that they can regrow over the impacted areas, and that is through reproduction. The corals every spring on the Great Barrier Reef, spring is in October, November, around the full moon, all the corals will actually spawn on the same night or over a couple of nights, which means that all the corals will somehow all be synchronized to the same mysterious moon clock, and they will all release their eggs and sperm into the water at the same time. It's one of the greatest spectacles on Earth. I've been out. It's one of the great wonders that you can come and see. If you come to the Great Barrier Reef during spawning time, you can actually see it happening. But is it a little bit weird if you think about what you're... I mean, that's a little bit disturbed, swimming around in fish sperm.
Whatever makes you happy.
Coral sperm, I mean. But yeah, like, it makes a lot of people happy. People come from all over the world to witness this. And so it's obviously so life affirming to see that the reef can do that every year. And it's a sign of its regeneration power. So each of those will obviously fertilize, turn into a tiny little baby coral larvae. Those will drift in the current. Many of them will get eaten by predators or just drift away and never find anywhere safe to live. But some of them will land onto a dead coral and start growing into a new coral. And so that is how the reef can regenerate itself after a disturbance like a coral bleaching event. all reefs, including the Great Barrier Reef, have this power to regenerate and reproduce, but their ability to regenerate is obviously being impacted because we know that climate change, due to the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas, is continuing to worsen, basically. So the ocean has continuously climbed in temperature. We're now at record high sea surface temperatures, and the coral bleaching events are becoming more frequent and closer together. So, like I said, there could be localized bleaching because of a flood in a small area, but there was never a mass bleaching across hundreds and thousands of square kilometers of reef up until the 1998 bleaching event was the first like really major one on the Great Barrier Reef. And then there wasn't another one until several years later. So they were a little bit far apart to begin with. But now they've become so frequent that we've now had 6 in the last 9 years. So they're becoming so frequent that the corals don't have very much time to grow back in between. So when these tiny coral larvae land, they obviously grow quite slowly. Corals, some species are a bit faster growing, but some of the slowest growing species only grow a few millimeters per year. So it actually takes decades for them to fully grow back to the size that they were before and to cover over all of the damaged areas. So we're in a critical window right now where we still have corals that we can save, but they really need our help. And it really is quite urgent. And it is crunch time for us to act on things like the burning of fossil fuels so that we can give the oceans a little bit of a break from these warming temperatures and give those corals a chance to repopulate and do what they will naturally do that if we give them the right conditions. And that's going to involve all of us supporting the transition to renewable energy and away from fossil fuels. And I can hear a lot of people asking, what about coral restoration, which is happening widely on the Great Barrier Reef? There's lots of people, especially the tourism operators. They are heavily involved because they are out there on the reef every day. They are the best equipped to go and get involved in coral planting activities. So tourism operators have been amazing. They're out there with their dive instructors. They'll take some tourists and show them the reef, educate them about the reef, teaching thousands of people every year about what they can do to help protect it. And they're also actively participating in scientific research on the reef, submitting data every day. When the tourism boats go out to the reef, they collect data, and they're also planting corals to help replant on the reef. So I can't emphasize enough how admirable the Great Barrier Reef tourism industry is and how much they're doing to help. And whatever impressions people might have of tourism in various parts of the world and some of the impacts that tourism can have are real. But we have very strong regulations in Australia. We have eco rules of what tourism companies can do to such a degree that visiting the reef with our eco certified tourism operators is something you can do to actually help the reef, because you're supporting those companies which are doing the coral planting and the research. So we've got it down to a quite eco-friendly art, the tourism industry in the Great Barrier Reef. And I mean, I can't speak for all operators because there's hundreds of them, but if you do your research and pick a eco-friendly company that's involved in those kind of scientific projects, then visiting the reef is 100% something that I recommend you do for anyone out there who's wondering what they can do to help protect the reef whilst also getting to experience its wonder that it still possesses. Coral restoration, in conclusion, is happening and it is a good thing, but that is kind of like a first aid measure. It's not going to be enough to save coral reefs overall, because those corals that are being planted will not be able to survive the next summer if we continue warming the ocean. So we basically, as a global community, need to transition to renewables as quickly as possible. And that means voting for leaders who have strong climate policies, who support things like the Paris Agreement. At the moment, there is a lot more that Australia could do because we have still been approving new fossil fuel projects in a time when we should be letting fossil fuel projects naturally attrition as they are aging and getting out of date. And whenever it's time to introduce a new energy project, we could be investing in the new shiny new technologies that we have, like renewable energy, and moving into the future.
I really agree that one of the things that is the most important for engaging people with the natural world and wanting to protect it is just going and experiencing it. And obviously not everybody is able to go to the Great Barrier Reef.
It's so important connecting with nature, whatever nature you have around you. And there are amazing underwater ecosystems in every ocean of Australia, including Melbourne. I mean,
Mm.
I understand you've got kelp forests and fairy penguins and seals and all kinds of things down there. So
Yeah.
get amongst it. I know it's freezing in Melbourne compared to what I'm used to on the Great Barrier Reef.
You mentioned before that the I don't know how to word it. The orgy of the corals, I suppose, is one of the great wonders of the Great Barrier Reef.
hmm
What are some other ones that come to your mind?
Ooh, in terms of scale, I mean, we have the mass migration of sea turtles at Rain Island, which is on a really remote part of the Great Barrier Reef. And there's some footage online because I actually wasn't there for it, but there's some footage online of just hundreds, maybe thousands of turtles all flocking onto this one tiny island to lay their eggs where there's no predators, like no dogs or, introduced predators like dogs and foxes and things. So that's like the last stronghold where the turtles can go and lay their eggs without them being predated as much. I mean, if you've seen any documentaries, you'll know that the baby turtles hatch out and almost immediately the seabirds start eating them. But that's why they lay so many, because at least some of them will survive to keep generations of turtles going. So I think sea turtles are something on everyone's bucket list. And I feel very lucky that I've been able to swim with so many of them. But unfortunately, another impact of climate change is when the sand on the beach gets too hot, it actually changes the sex of the turtles. So if cooler sand creates males and warmer sand creates females. And so now we've got, I think, more than 98% of all the sea turtles being born on the Great Barrier Reef are female, which for those males that are left, that might sound like a really great time, but it's going to be really hard for them to produce the next population of sea turtles. So I feel really lucky we get to see so many sea turtles there. There's so many out there, but is that going to be the case for in 10 years time or 20 years time? And also because the sand is getting so hot, the eggs are literally cooking before the babies can hatch, which is really, really sad. So I went from talking about what a wonder the turtles are to talking about the threats to them. But
But you're holding space for both emotions. You're amazed as well.
absolutely.
Yeah. So, other than going and touching grass or touching seagrass, what are some of the other calls to action that you might suggest, especially in relation to Australian Marine
Hmm.
Conservation Society?
Yeah, so a lot of people are quite across their recycling. Many people are now remembering to bring their own bags to the shops. Many people are remembering to bring their keep cup. Australians are passionate about trying to do their part for the environment. Don't give up and think, well, I can't do all those things, therefore I'm not going to do anything, because it's not it's too hard. Just pick a couple of things, because we don't just need one or two people doing things perfectly. We need everyone doing things imperfectly.
I think that I might be letting the side down in terms of everybody doing a little bit imperfectly because I'm doing everything perfectly.
I bet you are. Then there's indirect actions. So that means use your voice to influence the public knowledge of climate change and the impact it's having on the ocean, and to influence policy. And don't do things alone either. No person has all the answers themselves. Some of these groups, like AMCS, have resources, have upskilling sessions, have documentary screenings, webinars. You can learn from whatever level you're at what you can do to help climate action. Divesting is an important one. So check if your bank or super fund invests your hard earned money into fossil fuel projects. And there's actually tons of banks and super funds which now only invest in renewables and don't invest in fossil fuels. But spoiler alert, the big four like CommBank, NAB, Westpac, etc., there have been a lot of fossil fuel projects in their past. Visit marketforces.org.au and they've actually got the whole list of what each bank is investing in.
Okay.
But obviously, I want you to join the Australian Marine Conservation Society. So they've obviously got a website. You can follow them on Instagram, Facebook. And after you've listened to this podcast, hop on over to my podcast, Word on the Reef, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, and have a listen. And you can get even more disturbing facts about the marine life of the Great Barrier Reef.
Tanya, I don't want to be rude or anything, but for the for the whole duration of this conversation, I've had in the back of my mind that you said Finding Nemo wasn't actual footage, so I need to go home and check. So I'm gonna go do that. But thanks for meeting me.
Yeah, no worries. My pleasure. See you around. Happy snorkeling.
Happy snorkeling. Well, I'm back in my kitchen sink and I'm feeling reflective. That was a lot of information and calls to action. So let me do a real quick summary of what Tanya said in 4 main points. 1. Sea animals are weird, but not in a good way. Their proclivity for changing sex and behaving in ways which are socially unacceptable to humans should be frowned upon. 2. Humans should base our societies on the social structure of lobsters, and everyone should go out now and buy Jordan Peterson's book to learn more about biology. 3. Anal bleaching takes place in 83 countries and it's becoming more and more common. This is a disgrace. 4. And most importantly, it's too late for the coral reefs. We should all give up hope and panic. Conservation is a meaningless endeavour. Wow. 4 salient points. Now, for the sake of not babbling about nonsense for just 1 second, here's a moment of sincerity. I'd like to thank Tanya very much for her time. It was an extremely enlightening and inspiring conversation. And I'd like to thank the Australian Marine Conservation Society for their work. And I think, thank God for them. I'd like to thank Damon McMillan for the music, as ever. And thank you for listening. Thank you so much for listening. And here is poem. Come on, you can do this. Here is a poem. Yes. About the Great Barrier Reef. It's called The Orgy of the Corals. When the water's not too tidal, and in Celsius it's 26 degrees, when the sunset starts to idle over warm and shallow seas, in the Earth's largest living structure, so great it can be seen from space, in the norm there is a rupture, and on the reef begins a race. On the first full moon of November, when the plankton feeders slumber, that's when the corals do remember. It's time to multiply their number. For 6 nights love is in the water, gametes travelling through the schism, as all the coral polyps sigh in one collective jism. It's the orgy of the corals, it's a dance of eggs and sperm, it's an underwater snowstorm, new life foaming to affirm the future of their species, and so they all release as one their microscopic eggs and shoot thick loads of hot white bundles of sperm. Because unlike fish or octopus, coral cannot simply move around. A coral finds itself very much tethered to the ground. And so they synchronize a fleeting moment of their spawning to boost the chance of their genes meeting and get a generation dawning. A single egg bundle is ejected from her parent's stomach cavity, and right away she understands her mission with much gravity, to head up to the surface, to float around, and there she'll choose a nice fetching sperm bundle to whom she'll oh so gladly fuse. She begins her great ascension, her bright future in plain sight, but her parents failed to mention that on her way she might encounter swelling currents, which she soon learns for herself, and she's pulled down through the water and taken far along the shelf. Swirling underneath the surface in the inky moonlit depths, as a stark new world emerges, a bitter secret that was kept now reveals itself before her. A city thousands of years old, a place constructed by her ancestors, now a grim sight to behold. She sees a brittle bone-white graveyard, great cathedrals dead and dying, corals in each way scarred, their pallid colour is them crying. It's the bleaching of the corals. It's a scourge across our seas. And we can't rest on our laurels in the face of perils such as these. As the egg bundle is pulled further down across the haunting, desperate world, a hope of union starts to drown, and into nothingness she's hurled. At once, while she is sinking down, she is mercifully captured, and suddenly, surrounded by a net, it seems she has been raptured. Taken from the jaws of isolation and despair, the divine net pulls her higher, to the moonlight, to the air. She's been rescued by conservationists. They've scooped her up to allow her to be placed into a coral nursery, and so saved at the 11th hour. She is thrust out of the net into the confines of a sanctum, where she's protected, warm and sheltered, and she can float around as plankton. And they're floating alongside her, waiting patiently to confirm. Another brave survivor, a handsome bundle of sperm.